Hello and welcome to or back to my channel. I'm Kit, your friendly feminist cat lady spinster, and today we're going to get some relationship advice from Ben Shapiro and Jordan Peterson. So back in December, Ben Shapiro posted on his channel, Jordan Peterson gives the best relationship advice you'll ever hear. And, I was curious because I've heard a lot about both Ben and Jordan, and I wanted to check it out, and I just thought I would share. I hope we all learned something.
Part of the reason our eyes are the way they are, they have whites. That's an evolved adaptation so that we can see what other people's eyes are up to.
This is a very interesting way of beginning a relationship advice, but okay.
Interesting.
And everyone who didn't have visual whites, visible whites, either died or was killed or didn't mate. Right? And so I want to see where you're pointing your eyes because you're devoting a tremendous amount of cortical energy to that value specification. And if I can see what you're pointing your eyes at, then I know what you value. Then I can mimic your body with my body and we can fall into the same, what would you say, the same
Rhythm.
game.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, the same rhythm.
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah.
Okay, so I guess the first piece of advice is to keep an eye on what your partner is looking at because that will show you what they value.
And you see that in music, right? Because the musicians are heading towards a note. They all know that. They know when they're going to jump up and down in unison and hit that note.
Right.
And then they can play along the way. The music has a point, or you don't even want to listen to it.
Maybe it's because I'm not a musician, but if music doesn't have a point, we don't want to listen to it.
And it's so satisfying when they hit that climax all together, right? It's like, we got the point, man.
Well, that calls for a dirty.
It's true in relationships too, and I think that as we atomize ourselves in our relationships, I think the relationships break down. That you have to have that rhythm, and you also have to have the ability to.
That's why you dance with your partner.
Yeah,
So I thought Ben was supposed to be some sort of great speaker, just killing people all across the country with his speech and skills, but he seems to be having a difficulty getting his sentence out here.
That refusal to acknowledge the differences that you have with your partner.
I'm sorry, is he saying that people think they and their partners are totally the same with no differences?
And there's a beautiful thing in the beginning of Genesis. So the phrase that's used.
Is it just me, or when talking to conservatives, do we always somehow or another end up back at the Bible?
When it talks about Eve and Adam is before, so it's really fascinating. I mean, the whole thing is really beautifully symbolic. That Eve never receives a name until after they're kicked out of the Garden of Eden. She's called just the woman until that point, and then he names her, right? He first names her and he says, she will be called Isha, right, which is a derivative of Ish, which is the same word, just add a hey at the end, because that's how he sees her. She's a derivative of him. She's just an object for him to use.
Ben said it, not me.
And that's why she ends up talking to the snake, because if you're seen as an object by somebody, why would you want to talk with them? You're not an independent human being. And it's only
That's why you don't want to dance with someone who only has sexual gratification on their mind.
Exactly. And then she sins, they're kicked out, and then he renames her Eve, right? Adam calls her Eve.
Okay, so
because
hold
she's
on.
the mother of all
the first name
this
is
living.
given by who? Adam?
So I know Jordan Peterson is Canadian, but I find it really hard to believe that anyone on the North American continent, or pretty much anywhere these days, is unfamiliar with the origin story in the Bible, especially someone who hangs out with conservatives as often as Jordan Peterson does.
Adam. So he's naming all the animals,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And then it says that.
And that's giving them a reality, a semantic reality.
Right, and then God says none of these partners and Adam can't find a partner.
Right, they're not suitable.
And he says, so I'm going to give you a helpmate.
You need a woman, not a dog, not a pet dog.
Exactly. He says you need a helpmate, but the phrase that's used is ezer kenegdo. So it's translated helpmate.
Yeah.
What it actually means is a helper against you.
Oh.
That's what it actually means in Hebrew. Ezer kenegdo, right?
So there's an adversarial element in there.
Yeah, because what makes you a
there's
better
this
person
idea
is the
called-
adversarial element.
There's this idea in neurophysiology called opponent processing. It's really cool. So if you want to move your hand really smoothly this way, you can do it like that. But it's nowhere near as smooth as if you do this. You can be absolutely precise. So you really tense this hand against this hand, and then this one relents a little bit. It's absolute precision. And so that adversarial process, you imagine that women and men are slightly different temperamentally, or even quite a bit different.
I don't know why it's so hard for them to accept that people are different from each other. It's not that men are different from women or women are different from men. It's that men are individuals and women are individuals. That is why people don't just marry the first man or woman they see because they need someone who is actually compatible with them.
Well, you're trying to hit the mark, but the mark moves. And so how do you hit it? Well, you hit it with this adversarial process. And you do that with kids. And when you're negotiating in the house, too, it's like, well, you think this and I think this.
It sounds like Jordan Peterson is arguing for compromise. So, lesson number 2, ladies, don't be submissive, because in order for a man to stay on the steady path, he needs that resistance against him.
And that's why when you fundamentally refuse to acknowledge the difference between the sexes, you lose the ezer kenegdo part of that. You lose that opposition that's necessary.
Okay, so first off, no one is saying the sexes are the same. We all know and understand the biological difference between male and female. We are saying that how you are treated shouldn't be based on your sex. And second, my person, what makes me me, my personality, my values, my anything is not found in my ovaries.
Also, well, see, my wife has a more masculine temperament than me, and she's really low in politeness, which is an aspect of agreeableness.
So apparently all men do not actually want agreeable, submissive wives.
And it makes her quite formidable as a combatant, and sometimes in our life she'll say things that are so outrageous that, well, it usually makes me laugh. Like in an intense fight, she'll say like 3 of the worst insults you could possibly imagine, and it'll make me laugh.
I just don't really see verbal abuse as funny, whether it's coming from a man or a woman.
And it's hard sometimes to deal with her because of this more aggressive element. But it was also something that really attracted me towards her, because she's no pushover, and she's got this, like, she's got a kind of a knife-like sense of humor that comes out quite often. And so I really like the combative element to it.
Well, okay, I mean, some people do like to argue.
And that's part of what keeps a relationship dynamically alive. So that's very cool. So that's the first name?
So he first calls her Isha, and says, because God's going to give her his ezer kenegdo. And then, after the whole element with
and he
snake,
okay, so God says he's gonna deliver this. What's the word?
Ezer kenegdo, right? So it's a helpmate.
Right, but it's an adversarial partner.
Yeah, the word kenegdo literally means against him. Right?
Wow,
it's going to be
so
Ezer,
cool.
helper against him, right?
I know they don't mean it this way, but it sounds like they're saying you should find someone who's going to work against you.
Okay, and then Adam
calls
her
her Isha, right? Because says she's flesh of my flesh, she's bone of my bone, which is how a man sees a woman when the woman is just an object to him, right? Because she's mine, right? It's my possessiveness of her that defines her as a human being.
Have you been reading some red pill forums, Ben?
And the word woman, just like in English, is a derivative of the word man, right?
Yeah,
it's ish, which is spelled aleph yud shin. It's the same spelling, you just add a hey at the end, and now it's Isha, right? So she's going to be called woman because I'm called man, so she's,
she's a secondary derivative.
She's a secondary derivative of me.
Right, which is how a man would understand a woman. It's like she's like me except smaller.
Right.
Again, he said it, not me.
Exactly.
Right.
And then once she starts to bear children, then he calls her Chava, right? Eve, the mother, which is the same root of life and Chava, right? Chai is the same root. So it's
is that etymologically related to the word for chaos?
How badly does Jordan Peterson want the root word of woman to be connected to the word for chaos?
Do you know? In Hebrew?
Hebrew?
Yeah.
Like at
the formless chaos at the beginning of time. Is there a relationship between that and Eve's name?
I don't think so. I'd have to check it. But he says she's the mother of all living, and then that's how she's defined. What gives her a meaning is the thing that actually does give women meaning, and that we as a society have decided is the ability to bear children.
So in Ben Shapiro's words of wisdom, women who can't, won't, or don't bear children have no meaning.
Which is, of course, what we as a society have decided to deride and pretend is not a superpower. And
oh, Ben, if you really thought it was a superpower, you would be out there championing for women to have more maternal leave. You're just paying lip service.
And treat as a secondary aspect of femininity when it is, in fact, the primary aspect of femininity.
So Ben has 3 children. He must know what birth is like, right? I mean, I don't know if he was in the room when they were being born or not, but I've heard stories, and the word feminine doesn't really come to mind when I think of birth.
And so it's really, it's quite fascinating, and it's really...
That's why I like Beauty and the Beast. Because I taught a lot about hero mythology to my students, and the women would sometimes come up and say, well, what about the female heroes? And I thought, well, that's complicated, because you have the image of Mary, and that's pretty maternal, but in Christianity, Christ is also the redeemer of women, and that's an adventurous hero in some sense. It's like, so the female situation is complicated, right? Because there is this adventurous spirit, but it has to be combined with this maternal fecundity, let's say, and involuntarily. Well, what I really liked about Beauty and the Beast, and I do think that's the best Disney movie ever made, was that it's a real female hero myth.
So in the interest of full disclosure, Beauty and the Beast is also my favorite Disney movie, although Tangled is right up there. But yeah, okay. I'm curious to see where he's going to go with this.
I mean, the woman, Beauty, is beautiful, so she's high up in the female dominance hierarchy, but she's witty and well-read and intelligent and adventurous and brave and courageous and truthful, all of that. And she doesn't fall for Gaston, the psychopathic persona. And young women are much more likely to fall for men like that, by the way, than women who are slightly more, what would you say?
Mature.
Wiser. So they'll fall for dark triad men, and that's partly how psychopathy propagates itself across the generations.
Yeah, and that's why I disagree with pushing women to marry as early and as soon as possible.
Right? They can be enticed by psychopathic personas. But she prefers the Beast.
So Gaston is a psychopath, but the Beast, who was so selfish that he got himself and his entire household turned into, well, he turned into a beast and his staff were turned into ordinarily inanimate objects. So a man who is that selfish, who holds people hostage, is not a psychopath?
Mm-hmm.
It's like, well, the Beast is the adventure. It's like, well, is this terrible man, you know, like he's rough, he's unhued, but he's got potential. Right, and that's what really attracts her.
He does know that Belle didn't stay there willingly in the beginning, right? She offered herself as hostage in exchange for her father.
And she wants someone who can guard the walls and make a safe haven for the children, but who's generous enough who's productive enough to be useful and generous enough to share.
I don't remember him being productive. He was a prince, that's why he had a castle. And yes, it was very generous of him to feed his hostage and not let her starve.
And so she civilizes him, and that's, you know, you say, well, that's the female hero myth. It's like the civilizing of men is the female hero myth.
So I'm going to go against Jordan Peterson here and say, don't enter a relationship expecting that you can change someone.
And the civilizing of nature, in some sense, is the male hero myth.
And to pretend that that's like a secondary pursuit, which is what the society says, that like what we should value is, in a certain way, feminism is a construct of the patriarchy because
they're completely, and it's modern, guys, because the notion is, well, the men have got it all right, and all we'd have to do is for women to be more like men.
Right.
And this, ladies and gentlemen, is a very fine way of saying, I don't really know what feminism is about without saying you don't know what feminism is about. But I have a feeling that these two very rarely, if ever, admit when they don't know something.
Exactly.
That's your aim. My wife is engaged in a series of discussions with this Jonathan Pajot I mentioned earlier. It's an inquiry into the symbolism of the divine feminine, because we have a real question in our culture. We have a more elaborated narrative of, let's say, call it masculine heroism, and a more differentiated sense of masculine totalitarianism as well. The female role is still somewhat undifferentiated, and I think that's partly not acceptable anymore because women have control of the reproductive function now. So a lot of this has to become conscious. It can't just happen automatically.
Right. No, I mean, that's right. And so at a time when the virtues of femininity need to be taught more than ever.
Oh, okay. So femininity isn't just something that is innate in women then. It's something that we have to be actively taught. But if it's something that we have to actually be taught, then how do we know it's feminine?
They're being taught the opposite more than ever.
Because
you have to opt into this feature of humanity.
Wait a minute. Are they saying that pregnancy and childbirth are like what makes a woman feminine? Because that makes no sense.
Where before you didn't have to opt into it, it was going to be forced upon you, right? I mean, as long as you were going to engage in sexual activity, you were going to experience the joys of motherhood.
Right.
Motherhood is not a joy for everyone, Ben.
Right.
And you were going to have to play this role, but now you no longer have to, which means that you actually
have
to be taught that there's value in the role in order for you to embrace the role.
And you have to be willing to notice that within without seeing that as only part of you in your peculiarity and not as something regressive.
Can someone please tell me what he just said? Because to me, it sounded like he said women need to be shown that having kids isn't something they internally want, but it's something that they need to do as women.
Somebody clipped something I said and put it on one of those YouTube shorts. It's like 3 minutes long. It's got, 8 million views or something. And they called it advice to 19-year-old women. And so what I said in this brief video was that I've worked with women as peers my whole life. So I was part of the first generation, I would say, and certainly in my profession in psychology. there's been a plethora of women, certainly since before I entered the field. So I've worked with women as peers my entire life. And I worked, even before that, I worked in the daycare branch of Alberta Social Services and as a consultant, and that was mostly women too. So, and what I noticed about women, and this I really was struck home to me when I worked with high-end lawyers in Toronto, because I worked with the best law firms in Toronto for 10 years.
Can we skip the humble bragging and get to the point, please?
With their best lawyers. They would send them to me and some other people that were involved in this enterprise, and our deal was, we'll increase the efficiency of your high-end lawyers by 10% in terms of billable hours, but we work for them, not you. And so then I had about 15 of lawyers like this come and see me. They were skeptical to begin with, but we got over that pretty quick. And some of it was management discussion, some of it was strategy, some of it was sorting out their marriage, work-life balance. Like, it really depended on the individual, as it should in the therapeutic session. But we had a lot of discussions with the women because the law firms lost all their women in their early 30s. And the story was always the same. So these women who became these top lawyers, they all had the same story. They're hyper-conscientious and very, very smart. So they were top of junior high, top of high school, top of their class in college, went to a great law school, top law school class, they went to a great law firm, and then they walked through the legal ranks till they hit senior partner.
So was he like a career consultant?
No, like blinders on,
Right.
like conscientious people will have. I'm going to attain up this pyramid. Then they'd hit 30 or so when they hit senior partner, equivalent of tenured professor. And then they woke up and thought, what the hell am I doing here? I'm working like 80 hours a week, 75 hours a week, flat out. Because you don't get to that level unless you're performing. And you get a call at 2 a.m. from some client in China who's got a corporate merger. It's like, you're awake and on it.
Right.
And you put that on top of everything, or you don't get paid $750 an hour. And you say, well, that's the patriarchy. It's like, no, it's not. It's the market.
Is he trying to say that we don't understand the difference between patriarchy and capitalism? Because I can assure him we do. And for the record, no one, male or female, should be working 70, 80 hours a week. That is just not healthy, and the purpose of life is not to work. Yay, capitalism. So free. So this was a very weird video. Jordan Peterson and Ben Shapiro have quite a reputation for being extremely intelligent, well-spoken men, but I have to admit that in watching this video, I got some secondary cringe because it sounded like two men trying very hard to have an intellectual conversation, but instead coming off as pretentious. And it was also all over the place. We started off talking about the whites of people's eyes and evolution, and then we went to the Bible and how Adam understood Eve and how she got her name. And then we went to Beauty and the Beast of all things. And then we ended up talking about top lawyers. I mean, it's nice that Jordan Peterson admits that his wife is not actually the submissive, agreeable wife that apparently all men desire. But other than that, I can't think of anything that I really learned from this conversation. But hey, if you got something out of this conversation, please feel free to leave a comment below and let me know what it is. Anyway, that is it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Have a great day, and I will see you next week. Bye.